how to create a kind of fairly minimal application in Java Swing. And in this tutorial I was going to show you how to use grid bag layout, but I've realized that it's going to be necessary to break that down into two tutorials. So in this tutorial we're going to add a new panel to this application, which eventually is going to be a form with some controls on it. But for this tutorial we're just going to create the panel itself, and then we're going to add the controls using grid bag layout in the next tutorial. So the first thing to do is create the panel. So I'm going to go to new class and I'm going to call this details panel. This is going to be a form where you can fill in kind of personal details, and I'm going to make that derived from jpanel. Jpanel is the swing control component that implements a kind of blank panel that you can add stuff to. And now, so I've got my details panel here, and in my main frame I'm just going to add that panel to the application. So I'll have a private instance variable here called details panel, and later on I will say details panel equals new details panel, and then I'll add that to the left hand side of the application here by saying border layout dot west. What west? Okay, and so if we look at that now, okay, yeah, details panel. If we look at this, after I've got rid of the errors, what else do we have? Okay, that's good. Then we have actually added a panel, but it's extremely narrow and of no use at all. So here in the details panel constructor, well, first I'll add a constructor, details panel, like this, and I'm gonna get the preferred size of this panel. So there's a class called dimensions that that kind of specifies a size, and I'm going to say dimension size equals get preferred size, and Control Shift O to add the import. And oh yeah, sorry, it's dimension, not dimensions. And then I'm going to just set the size. I'm going to set the width of the size to 250 pixels. And then, so I've done get preferred size, change the width, and now I'm going to do set preferred size to set this kind of size back on the panel. And if I run this now, you can see that my panel takes up 250 pixels, which looks ridiculous if you've got a small application, but the idea is you're going to be able to resize it like that. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is set a border on the panel, because I want it to have a kind of titled border around it. So I'll say set border, and I'll say border factory, and border factory is a factory class that creates different kinds of borders, and I want create titled border here, and I want to specify a title. So I'll say, I don't know, personal details maybe, and so I'm just doing set border, and the border I'm setting is a border got from border factory.create title border. I'll specify the title here, and what that looks like is this. So it's quite a presentable little border. Now I'm going to create some controls. So I'm going to use a couple of JLabels, and JLabels just let you put some text on your panel. So I'm going to have one label equals new JLabel. I'm going to have one label called name, and this is going to be a label by the side of the control where you enter your name, JLabel, and I'm going to have a let's say a occupation label equals new JLabel occupation, and Control Shift O to add the import. And I'm going to have a couple of text fields, and these text fields, JText field, are they're just kind of like a little one-line thing of text, like this control up here in Eclipse, that one. So I'll say name field, and this is where the person can actually enter their name, equals new JText field. And you specify the number of columns here, and the number of columns seems to be very approximate, and usually the text field is way bigger than you'd expect it. So I assume that this number of columns applies to some kind of standard font, but I maybe have my font set to much smaller than the designers of Swing expected, because I always find that this is too big. But 10 columns is a reasonable number for many purposes, and I'll have occupation field equals new J text field, and I'll say 10 again, at least for the moment. And so I've got two labels, and I've got the controls that are going to go by the sides of those labels, and I also want to have a J button at the bottom, and the button is going to be a button that lets me add these kind of details to some kind of database. So I'll say J equals new J button, and I'll say I'll put the label on the button. I'll make it add. Okay, Control Shift O to add the imports. And the next stage now is to kind of set the layout. So at the moment, I'm not actually adding these controls anywhere, and I'm going to use I'm going to set layout. I'm going to use a new grid bag layout like that. And grid bag layout lets you add controls in conjunction with a grid bag constraints. So you need a grid bag constraints, and the grid bag constraints is the class where you specify exactly where you want each control to go. New grid bag constraints, and I'm going to leave that there for the moment, and we will add these controls using this layout and these constraints in the next tutorial. But for the rest of this tutorial, I've just got a couple of minutes. I want to quickly mention that if you install the free Window Builder Pro, which you can find, which Google have released last year as a free Eclipse plugin, you can actually design panels. You can also design frames and things like that. But you can go to New. If you go to New and Other, once you've got the plugin installed via the, I think it's via the Help menu, and then you can say on the Swing Designer New JPanel, and give that a name, Test Panel. I won't actually use this here, but I just want to quickly show you this in case you want a visual alternative. And then here you can switch between source and design, and you can sort of drag and drop things onto your panel by clicking there. Oh, you need to set the layout as well by right clicking and going to set layout. But I'm not going to go into that here. We're going to do everything manually, but I just wanted to show you this because people always ask, is there a way of doing this visually? And the answer is yes, but the visual way isn't quite as good as you might imagine, because you still have to worry about layouts and things like that, so it's not perfect. And you still kind of probably need to know all this kind of stuff. Okay, so that's all for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial